Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Krishna Rukmini, Jaya Satyabhama, Krishna Rukmini, Jaya Satyabhama. Jaya Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Prahlad Narsimha, Jaya Prahlad Narsimha, Prahlad Narsimha, Jaya Prahlad Narsimha. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शतषि श्रीमद् डिवाइन ग्रेस भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की ISKCON संस्थापकाचार्य जगद्गुरु सेव द होल वर्ल्ड श्रील प्रभुपाद की ताय गौर प्रेमानंदे। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय, ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय, ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 4, Text number 15. Saha kadachit sarasvatya, sa kadachit sarasvatya, upasprushya jalam shuchihi, upasprushya jalam shuchihi, vivikta eka आसीना, विविक्त एक आसीना, उदिते रवि मंडले, उदिते रवि मंडले, सकदाचित सरस्वत्या, उपस्पृश्य जलम शुचिः, विविक्त एक आसीना, उदिते रवि मंडले, सकदाचित सरस्वत्या, उपस्पृश्य जलम शुचिः, विविक्त एक आसीना, उदिते रविमंडले, सकदाचित सरस्वत्या, Upasprisya jalam suchihi Vivikta eka asina Udite ravimandale Saha Hi Kadachit once Sarasvatya on the bank of the Saraswati Upasprisya after finishing morning ablutions Jalam water Shuchihi being purified Vivikte concentration Ekaha alone Asinaha being thus seated Udite on the rise Ravimandale of the sun disk. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Once upon a time, he, Vyasadeva, as the sun rose, took his morning ablution in the waters of the Saraswati and sat alone to concentrate. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The river Saraswati is flowing in the Badrikashrama area of the Himalayas. So, the place indicated here is Samyaprasha in Badrikashrama, where Sri Vyasadeva is residing. Please repeat this translation. Once upon a time, he, Vyasadeva, as the sun rose, took his morning ablution in the waters of the Saraswati and sat alone to concentrate. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanushalakayat Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Sakadachit Sarasvatya Upasprisya Jalam Suchihi Vivikta Eka Asina Udite Ravimandale. So here this chapter is titled Appearance of Sri Narada. And before the appearance of Narada is described, here the appearance of Vyasadeva and some of his activities and his glorification is also described. In the previous verse number 14, Vyasadeva's appearance in this material world was described. Suta Goswami said, Dvapare samanuprapte tritiye yugaparyaye jata parasharat yogi vasavyam kalaya harehe. When the second millennium overlapped with the third, this great sage Vyasadeva, he was born to Parashara in the womb of Satyavati. Jata Parasharat Yogi. Vasavyam Kalaya Harehe. It is also mentioned his position Kalaya Harehe. He is no ordinary person. He is a plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari. So that was described in the previous verse. And in this verse, it is described, his activities are being described. What did he do? So once upon a time, Vyasadeva, as the sun rose, residing in Badrikashrama, he took his morning ablution in the waters of the Saraswati and sat alone to concentrate. It is necessary for all of us to know the glory of Vyasadeva, what great a personality he is, because Vyasa is the person who has compiled all the Vedic literatures. Vyasa specifically refers to a post or a position which is taken upon by an empowered living entity to put down in writing all the Vedic literatures. Because formerly, previous to Kali Yuga, there was no system of writing. Prabhupada says people were so sharp in their memory that the students would hear once from the Guru and all the instructions and all the Vedic literatures and the subject matter would be immediately stored in their memory. So powerful was their memory. So there was no need for writing. But as Dwapara Yuga ended and Kali Yuga was approaching, Vyasadeva, Kalaya Harehe, the Supreme Lord himself, the plenary portion of the Supreme Lord himself, could see that the people would not be so intelligent. They would not be able to remember everything, whatever they hear. So he decided to put everything in writing. So that is Vyasa's function. Vyasa is a post. Every now and then, one empowered living entity takes up that position and performs that service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, it's necessary to know the glories of Vyasadeva, because Vyasadeva's most important literature which he has composed among all the literatures, his final and most important one is the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Vyasa has mentioned Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he has also described wonderful pastimes and activities of Krishna, which are the subject matter of confusion for most people of the modern civilization. What bewilders people when they approach the Vedic literatures is the activities of the Supreme Lord Krishna. Because all the activities of Krishna which he has performed, they all demonstrate Krishna's complete control over material nature, complete dominance over material nature. In the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says, Maya adhyakshena prakritihi. This prakriti or material nature, Maya adhyakshena, it is running under my control. So material nature and the elements of material nature, like earth, water, fire, air, ether, everything in this cosmos is under my control. That is mentioned by Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita. And in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Krishna has described how everything is under his control. So all the pastimes of Krishna which are described in the Bhagavatam, Krishna's different activities, they demonstrate Krishna's ability to have material nature fully under his control. So this is very, very bewildering for people of the modern civilization. Even in the olden days it was very bewildering. People were not able to accept Krishna as the supreme controller of material nature. But in the modern civilization, because of the lack of Vedic education, it is all the more bewildering. So people take all these activities of Krishna, Krishna Leela, the pastimes of Krishna, as mythology. Mythology means it is all myth. It cannot be true. How is it possible? Because, for example, in the Bhagavatam it is described when there was a forest fire in Vrindavan, and all the Vrajavasis, they cried to Krishna for help, and Krishna immediately swallowed the whole forest fire. So, when any educated person, philosophically inclined person, he reads of such an activity, he cannot believe it. How can a 7 or 8-year-old, 10-year-old boy, he can swallow the whole forest fire? We cannot even swallow one matchstick if it is lighted. So, how can somebody swallow the whole forest fire? So, it has to be mythology. Similarly, Krishna also demonstrated by lifting the Govardhana hill for 7 days continuously when there was heavy rain. And not only he lifted Govardhana hill, it is also mentioned that the Vrajavasis who were taking shelter of the Govardhana hill, they did not feel hunger or thirst or fatigue for 7 days. This also is a demonstration of Krishna's supremacy over material nature. Because in this world, all those people who are born in this world, everybody is perfectly under the control of material nature. Nobody can surpass the laws of material nature. For example, fire is hot. Fire is hot for everyone. Nobody can say if I touch fire it is cold for me. That is a law of material nature. Nobody can surpass that. But Krishna swallows forest fire. So is it not hot? So it is not hot. So heat or fire is very hot only for all of us. Only for all of us fire has to burn us. Fire cannot burn Krishna because Krishna says, Maya adhyakshena prakritihi. The prakriti is under my control. So when people hear that somebody swallowed the forest fire, they think it has to be mythology. Because fire is very hot, so why it has not burnt Krishna? So therefore they conclude that this is all poetic imagination. That is how people conclude when they hear the pastimes of Krishna. Similarly, lifting the Govardhana hill also, it is beyond the conception of anybody. How can somebody lift such a heavy object? Ordinarily we can lift a few kilos. But something as huge as Govardhana mountain and to lift it for 7 days altogether completely defies law of material nature. Like that, if we study each and every pastime of Krishna, in each and every activity, Krishna has demonstrated that material nature is perfectly under my control. When Krishna was a mere baby, 3-month-old baby, a very powerful demon by the name Putana. She came to kill Krishna by smearing poison on her breast and tried to give milk to Krishna. Krishna sucked the life air out of Putana. This is also mentioned in Bhagavatam. Like that, so many activities are there. Kalinga and Ardhana, it is mentioned that the lake in which Kaliya was living was filled with deadly poison. So poisonous it was that any bird which would fly on top of the lake immediately would fall down dead simply by smelling the vapors of the poison. But Krishna jumped into the lake. He played around with Kaliya. He performed so many acts. The poison did not touch him. So again, the surpassing material nature. Material nature does not or cannot enforce its jurisdiction upon Krishna. This is the tattva of the Lord. So unless somebody knows this tattva of the Lord and is thoroughly convinced of Krishna's complete control over material nature, that God means by definition he has to have material nature under his control, only then he can appreciate the pastimes of Krishna. Without knowing this tattva, if somebody reads the pastimes of Krishna, he will definitely come to the conclusion of fiction or mythology. So like this, all the pastimes of Krishna, any other activity of Krishna we take, which is mentioned in the Bhagavatam, all the Leelas of Krishna. It is also mentioned Krishna and Balaram jumped from a hill, which is 88 miles. They jumped all the way, and nothing happened to them. Like that, all the pastimes of Krishna, which Krishna performed, is simply to demonstrate to all the living entities of this world that I am not one of you. Because Prabhupada explains, Krishna descends to this world to attract all the living entities towards himself. And that attraction to Krishna is the path of salvation. That is the path of happiness. That is the path of auspiciousness. So unless the living entities get attracted to Krishna, there is no hope for them in this material world. So Krishna comes to attract all the living entities to him. So how he attracts? He attracts by speaking Bhagavad-gita, and he also attracts everyone by performing activities. And in all these activities, there is one common thread running, which is Krishna's total control. Shri Krishna, Rukmini, Satyabhama ki, Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Gaur-Nitai ki, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada. So in all these pastimes of Krishna, Krishna Leela, these are all describing Krishna's complete control over material nature. In fact, Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna's Leela is categorized into two. One which he performs with the internal energy, and the other which he performs with the external energy. So the pastimes of Krishna which are performed with the internal energy are all very high esoteric subject matter. It's like Rasa Leela, his different conjugal loving exchanges with the gopis. These are all activities which he performs exclusively with the internal energy. And the pastimes where Krishna deals with the external energy is all this control over material nature. Swallowing the forest fire, jumping from a hill which is 88 miles high, and then subduing Kaliya. The poisonous vapors of the Kaliya does not touch Krishna. Killing Putana when he was only a 3-month-old baby. And then the Yamalarjuna trees, the famous Damodara pastime. Krishna was a mere baby. He was a very small baby. And then he was stuck in between the two huge Yamalarjuna trees. And simply by little endeavor or no endeavor, those trees came crashing down. So this is also complete control and supremacy over material nature. No baby can exhibit such strength. So Krishna, even as a baby, is the Supreme Personality of God. So all the pastimes of Krishna which deal with the external energy are simply to demonstrate to the living entities of this world that he is supremely in control of laws of material nature. Laws of material nature are not applicable to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if somebody thinks that the laws of material nature should be applicable to the Lord also, then that is imposing our limitation on God. That is imposing our limitation on God. And that goes against the very definition of God. God means he has total control over material nature. Otherwise he cannot be God. So all this is recorded by Srila Vyasadeva, the great Vyasadeva. And if somebody has to appreciate these pastimes, it is very much useful if one can know the glory of Vyasadeva. How glorious a person is. Who is speaking? That is the point. Who is saying that Krishna has swallowed a forest fire? Who is saying that Krishna has lifted Govardhana hill on his little finger for 7 days? Who is saying that as a baby he made the two huge Yamalarjuna trees came crashing down? Who is saying that he subdued Kaliya? Who is saying when he was a 3-month-old baby? None other than the great personality Vyasadeva. So what is Vyasadeva's greatness? Why did a person like Vyasadeva, why should he take the trouble to explain the activities of some child if they are all actually some childish activities? Why should a great sage like Vyasadeva compose them at the end of his life when he is in search of the final instruction? After having composed the entire, compiled the entire Vedic literature, Vyasadeva is not feeling satisfaction. Then his spiritual master Srila Narada appears before him and gives him instruction and says, now you compose something explaining the activities of the Supreme Lord, and then he composes the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So that is the magnum opus of Vyasadeva. So why should Vyasadeva, a person of his stature, waste his time in explaining the activities of some child unless that child is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead? So all this will become very clear if we know the glories of Vyasadeva. So, and the glory of Vyasadeva is known by what quality of composition he has done. What kind of literature Vyasadeva has composed, that if we know, then we will be able to appreciate the glories of Vyasadeva. And the more we appreciate the glories of Vyasadeva, on his authority we accept Krishna's wonderful activities. And therefore, we save ourselves from the doubt that these cannot be mythological or fiction in nature. So in the Western world, generally, there are some great philosophers who are considered the greatest thinkers in the Western world. So people like Socrates, people would have heard of Socrates. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Schopenhauer, famous Darwin, everybody has heard of Darwin, Charles Darwin. John Stuart Mill is a British philosopher, he's also a very great philosopher. Then Karl Marx, everyone knows about Karl Marx, his philosophy on communism. Then Friedrich Nietzsche is a German philosopher. Sigmund Freud, who propounded about psychoanalysis, all these things. Then Sartre, another great French philosopher. Carl Jung. These are all some great philosophers in the Western world. And any great thinker or any great philosopher, when he philosophizes something, more or less he will quote from one of these great philosophers. He will either quote from Socrates or Plato or Aristotle or Karl Marx or from Darwin or John Stuart Mill. That is the way it is in the Western philosophical realm of thought. Now, these are all considered, these persons are all Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Augustine, Schopenhauer, Darwin, they are all considered very great philosophers, very great intellectual giants in the Western world. So their words have a lot of weight in the modern civilization. Now, superior to them, superior to all these great philosophers are the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. In India, traditionally, there are some great philosophers. And these philosophers are considered far, 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 far greater than any of these philosophers. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle and all those things. Because their philosophical approach to what is this world, what is the ultimate cause, is considered much more exhaustive and thorough than any of these philosophers. That means the intellectual capacity of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Karl Marx, Freud, Carl Jung, although they are also very great in their own estimation, they come nowhere near the 6 systems of Indian philosophy. Generally, 6 systems of Indian philosophy are known as Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamasa, and Uttara Mimamasa or Vedanta. And the great rishis who have propounded these philosophies, Kanada, Gautama, Kapila, Patanjali, Jaimini, and finally Vyasa himself. So all these different Indian philosophical, generally it's considered 6 systems of Indian philosophy. These philosophers are far, far, far greater than any of the Western philosophers. For example, Nyaya, the exhaustive Nyaya Sutras are there. It runs into hundreds and hundreds of pages explaining the world view. The objective of these philosophers, Indian philosophers or Western philosophers for that matter, is to find out what is the ultimate cause, what is the ultimate truth, what is it that ultimately we have to know, what is the final ultimate objective. They all try to philosophize. In the Western world, it is purely on mental speculation. It is purely by their capacity to think, their capacity to analyze. They have put forward different philosophers. In the Indian philosophy, they are little more refined. They use the Vedic statements. They accept Vedas or portions of the Vedas, and based on Vedic statements, they have also propounded different philosophies, explaining what is the ultimate cause. Now, Vyasadeva is far greater than all these philosophers also. Why? Because Vyasadeva has composed the greatest philosophical work is called Vedanta Sutra. So, no philosophical work in this world can come anywhere close to Vedanta Sutra. It is actually called Vedanta Sutra because it is one type of composition where a huge amount of meaning is compressed into small words. That is called Sutra. This Narada Bhakti Sutra, this Nyaya Sutra, similarly Vedanta Sutra. So Vedanta is considered as the ultimate philosophy. Nobody can philosophize in a better way or explain this world and its causes and how it is running and everything more exhaustively than Vyasadeva. So Vyasa's composition of Vedanta is considered the ultimate. That is why in the Indian traditional culture also, every sampradaya must have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Unless somebody has written a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, your worship or mode of worship or practice of religious rituals is not considered as bona fide. So Vedanta is ultimate. That means if you are coming and explaining, giving an explanation that this is the ultimate thing, then you have to explain it on the basis of Vedanta Sutra. Unless somebody is able to explain Vedanta, he is not considered as any of any importance. Because Vedanta Sutra is the ultimate. That is the standard of Vyasadeva's composition. That is why in India also, all great acharyas, they comment upon Vedanta Sutra. Ramanujacharya, his guru, spiritual master, Adavanda, he gave him 3 instructions. One of the instruction is, please write a commentary on Brahma Sutra. And Madhvacharya, when he appeared, he also wrote a commentary on Brahma Sutra. Even in Jaipur, when the worship of Radha and Krishna, the Gaudiya Sampradaya, was being challenged or doubted by some people, some devotees were saying, where is this authority of Radha Krishna worship? Where is authority for all this? How can we accept these Gaudiya Vaishnavas as bona fide? Immediately, Baladev Vidya Bhushan wrote a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Within one night, that commentary was ready. And as soon as the commentary on Vedanta Sutra was ready, then all doubts were clarified. So that is the standard of Vedanta Sutra. So nobody in this world, so Western philosophers, they are all very great thinkers, but the Indian philosophers surpass these Western philosophers. Kannada, Gautama, Patanjali, all these persons. Much more exhaustive, far more exhaustive. The language itself is far superior. Western philosophers mostly have commented in English or German or French. Indian philosophy, all of them are in Sanskrit language. And Sanskrit language, to master the grammar itself, it takes 12 years. You can imagine. Just to master the language. So many rules and regulations and different kinds of rules and regulations are there. How to compose a sentence in a proper way, there are rules and regulations. If there is little deviation, the sentence formation itself is wrong. So that much refined is the language. And all Indian philosophers, they have composed all their philosophies in Sanskrit language, whether it is Gautama or Kannada or Kapila or any of them. Of course, Kapila here doesn't refer to the Supreme Lord Kapila mentioned in the Bhagavatam. This is another Kapila, atheistic Kapila. There are 2 Kapilas in Indian history. So, all these persons. But superior to all of them is Vyasadeva's Vedanta. So that is why Vedanta is considered the ultimate philosophy. Veda Anta. Veda means knowledge. Anta means an end of knowledge. So nobody can bring forth a philosophical composition greater than Vyasadeva's Vedanta Sutra. It is Vyasa's authority. And Vyasa is none other than the Supreme Lord himself. Who else can compose such a thing? Kalaya Harehe, like it is mentioned in the previous verse. So Vyasadeva's composition and Vyasadeva's exposition of explaining the truth is considered to be the ultimate. And all great acharyas in India comment upon Vyasadeva. And that Vyasadeva, who has given the greatest philosophical treatise of Vedanta Sutra, he explains in the Bhagavatam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, that this child is no ordinary child. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He explains all the different activities of Krishna. It is Vyasa who has explained in the Bhagavatam, Krishna lifted Govardhana hill. He swallowed the forest fire. He killed Putana when he was 3 months old. And that Vyasadeva, in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, explains Krishna's appearance in the 10th canto. Tam Adbhutam Balakam. That Balaka, that child was Adbhutam. Tam Adbhutam Balakam. Ambujekshanam. Chaturbhujam. That child had 4 hands. This is appearance of Krishna in the jail where Devaki and Vasudeva are there. Chaturbhujam, 4-handed child. Shanka Gada Adi Udayudam. The child had Shanka, Gada and Ayuda, different kinds of weapons. Srivatsa Lakshanam. There was a mark of Srivatsa on the chest of the child. Galashobi Kaustubam. There was also a Kaustuba Mala on the child. Pitambaram. The newborn child was wearing yellow garments. Pitambaram. Sandra Payoda Shaubagam. Maharna Vaidurya Kirita Kundala. Kirita, Kundala, Vaidurya. All these things the child was adorned with. Trisha Parishvakta Sahasra Kuntalam. The child had scattered hair, very beautiful hair. Uddama Kanchi Angada Kankanadibhir Virochamanam, very beautifully decorated. Vasudeva Aikshita. So Vasudeva, the father of Krishna, he saw that this child was so wonderfully decorated. So all this description is given in the Bhagavatam about Krishna's appearance, Krishna's divinity, Krishna's activities, by none other than the great person, Srila Vyasadeva, about whom it is being described here. Sakadachit Saraswatya, he was sitting on the banks of Saraswati. Upasprishya Jalam Suchihi, Vivikta Eka Asina, Udite Ravimandale, he took his morning ablution and sat alone to concentrate. And further it will be described what are the activities of Vyasadeva. So Vyasa's authority is there behind all the different activities of Krishna. So anytime anybody has a doubt or a confusion whether Krishna Leela is all mythology or real, he should just peep into the intellectual greatness of Vyasadeva. One will be completely bewildered. Nobody can approach Vyasadeva's capacity. Nobody can compose. Nobody can compose anything like Vedanta Sutra. Forget about composing. Nobody can even understand what Vyasadeva has composed. Even if he knows Sanskrit language. Vedanta Sutra is such a subject matter. First of all, the language itself takes 12 years to master. And even if somebody knows the Sanskrit language, still he cannot comment on Vedanta Sutra. Only an empowered Acharya who descends from the spiritual world, who is specifically empowered by Krishna, only he can comment upon Vedanta Sutra. Others cannot comment. Even Sanskrit scholars cannot comment. It is beyond their capacity also. So you can imagine what is Vyasadeva's level. So nobody in this world practically can come anywhere near the authority, the greatness, the spiritual potency, the intellectual giantness of Vyasadeva. And that Vyasadeva has concluded in the Bhagavatam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. This child, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, he appeared in the house of Nanda and Yashoda before appearing to Vasudeva and Devaki. And Vyasadeva's literature, his composition, is practically such that no person of the modern society can approach them. Vyasadeva has composed great literature, but nobody is in a position to understand all that. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada's great contribution is to describe in English language what Vyasadeva has described in Sanskrit language. So Prabhupada once mentioned that my life and soul is to translate these Vedic literatures. So that is a great contribution of Srila Prabhupada. Without Srila Prabhupada's purports and this commentary in modern language for the modern people, nobody would know the greatness of Vyasadeva. Nobody would know the glories of Krishna. So that is Srila Prabhupada's contribution. So all his purports are all explaining Vedanta philosophy. Throughout his purports, Prabhupada is explaining Vedanta philosophy. Bhakti Vedanta Swami. Prabhupada is very, very particular about this title. Bhakti Vedanta Swami. Because Bhakti generally people take as sentiment. So Bhakti Vedanta purport literally means that these sentiments of Bhakti, spiritual sentiment, they're all solidly resting on the platform of Vedanta. So it is not a sentiment. It is something spiritually divine. So that is Srila Prabhupada's contribution. That is why the spiritual master or the guru must be a representative of Vyasadeva. Unless somebody is a representative of Vyasadeva, he cannot be a guru. That means his conclusion, whatever the guru is telling, should not disagree with the conclusion of Vyasadeva. Vyasa has declared Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The bona fide spiritual master should also agree with Vyasadeva. Nobody can surpass Vyasadeva. That is why the appearance day of the spiritual master is also called as Vyasa Puja, because he is a representative of Vyasa. So that is Srila Prabhupada's great contribution in modern language, modern English language, which have further got translated into French, German and other languages, and also into all other Indian languages. Prabhupada has explained Vedanta philosophy and has also explained Krishna's wonderful Leela. So by reading, Prabhupada's purports are a combination of Vedanta philosophy and describing the name, form, qualities and activities of Krishna. So that is the wonderful nature of Srila Prabhupada's purports. By reading them, one will get to know all that Vyasadeva has communicated in his Vedic literature. So with these few words, we will stop today's Srimad-Bhagavatam class. Granthra Srimad-Bhagavatam ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.